All right, welcome back, guys. Today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our author of The Call of the Wild, Jack London. He lived from 1876 to 1916, so my wonderful mathematicians out there will be able to figure out how long that was. He was raised poor. This is his dog Rollo. His real father left them when he was young, and his stepfather had the last name London, so he took his name. But they still didn't have a lot of money, so Jack had to work early and hard to get through as a young man. A couple of the jobs he did were he would set the pins at the bowling alley. Back then, there weren't machines to do that, so they hired children, and they would set pins so the bowlers could try and knock them down again. Sort of menial work, menial being redundant and boring, but it was a job. He also, because they lived in California, he was born in San Francisco by the water. He also worked as a canner in a cannery. That's where they would take fish and they would put them into the cans to be sold at the supermarket. A pretty nasty, hard, and definitely smelly job. And this is what he made at that job. 10 cents an hour. He worked for 12 hours sometimes. And at 10 cents an hour, working 12 hours, that's $1.20. So he saved up and he bought himself a little boat like this one here. And he would work for the government fish patrol, checking on fishermen, but he would also sail around stealing oysters and other seafood and selling them to restaurants to make money. And he was able to make money, a lot more money that way than setting up pins or canning. So he was a bit of a pirate early on to make ends meet. It also taught him how to sail and a love of the water. Now, if you look at the California map on the left, it shows San Francisco, where he was born. And then on the right, Glen Ellen is starred, which is where he lived at the end of his life and where he passed away from kidney failure later in life. But before that, after he had learned to sail on that little boat in San Francisco, he got a job on a much bigger boat that took him out to Japan seal hunting. And he loved the area in Asia and Japan and went back as a war correspondent later in life to cover the Russo-Japanese War from 1904 to 1905. That was a war between the Russians and the Japanese. And a war correspondent is a reporter that's covering the war. And in this case, he was covering it for Americans to read about back at home. When he was back at home in California, he got interested in the Klondike Gold Rush, which we're reading about in Call of the Wild. So he really did go up to Alaska, just like he writes about with Buck, and looked for gold, prospected for gold, learned all about Alaska, the sled dogs, the wildlife that he'll write about in our story. But unfortunately for him, he did not find gold. So he went back to California, got his high school. He hadn't finished school, took about a semester of college, decided it wasn't for him, but he knew he wanted to be a writer. So he started writing. He made himself get up and write 1,000 words every day on different subjects. And he finally started selling some of his short works to magazines to make ends meet. And then The Call of the Wild was his big breakout hit that really made him some money. He became a very famous author, an American author. He was famous because of his personal style and the ability to write about things like the Alaskan wilderness from a dog's perspective in Call of the Wild and White Fang. He was a bit of an environmentalist, and he also understood the wildlife and the areas he wrote about from his first-hand experience. After becoming relatively famous and good author. He was what we call prolific. Prolific means he wrote a lot. Not everything he wrote would get published, but if he sat down and wrote 1,000 words every day, you can imagine how many books and articles and essays he wrote. So the little map on the right showing Australia, this is the South Pacific Ocean, where a bunch of these little islands he sailed with his wife to write about and to see more of the world and for adventure on a boat called the Snark, S-N-A-R-K. So he wrote about that as well. Unfortunately, he got sick while sailing and moved back to the States. Here are some of his books, some of the more famous ones. Call of Wild that we're reading now. White Fang, which is similar to Call of the Wild, but it's not about Buck. It's about a wild dog and taking a journey the other way. Instead of from domestic to wild, from wild to domestic. His Stories for Boys, some of you might have around the house. The Sea Wolf, about his travels on the sea earlier on in life. The Valley of the Moon, To Build a Fire, about survival. South Sea Tales, about those voyages he took with his wife on the Snark and those islands around Australia. So he published many books. Was very famous. He was also very generous and took care of family and friends. So he didn't have a whole lot of money at the end of his life, and he got very sick and died in 1916, which again, my wonderful mathematicians will be able to do that math from 76 to 16 and see that he was very young, younger than I am now when he died. And that's a little background on Jack London. I hope you liked it. There's also a brain pop on him if you're interested in learning more. Thank you so much. I look forward to reading section 3 with you on Wednesday, and keep the questions coming.